What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Variant the Podcast. As always, we have a lot of cool topics to talk about today, and I don't know about you, Tim, but I just looked at our bullet points, and it's really like DC heavy, right?
It is, and that's not surprising. It seems to have been the case for the last 2 months.
Right?
Everything just seems to be, because it's felt like anyway, DC is the only one doing anything.
For real, especially during, this whole pandemic and quarantine, the kind of Marvel went a little quiet for a bit, and, DC was kind of at the front lines, kind of push. We talked about it last week. They were the ones that really started, getting comic books back out to comic book shops, and even giving us digital comics here and there during, the past 2 months.
Yeah, they've definitely been the ones pushing the envelope the most. And trying to, I think again, large part I think is because I think they're under the most pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes a ton of sense, but we'll get into some of it. Let's just dive in and we'll get into some more of that.
For sure. And I think the perfect way to kick this off is by kind of continuing our thoughts with Justice League Dark Apokolips War. We already gave our spoiler-filled review, but we kind of missed something. So there was a lot to talk about in this movie, and we definitely left out some awesome parts that we both wanted to expand upon today. And before we say anything, I do want to warn you guys, this is going to be spoilers galore for Justice League Dark Apokolips War.
Yeah, after we got done with the spoiler review, both of us, we were so excited just to talk about the movie in general.
Mm-hmm.
We just sat there going, oh, we forgot this, we forgot that, we forgot this. Because there's so much that happened. There's probably a shorter list of what didn't happen and take place in that movie,
right,
than the list of things that did. It was just so jam-packed.
It really, really was. And one of the big things that we left out was the fact that, at the beginning of the movie, Darkseid obviously slaughters most of the League and captures them, right? And one of the ones he captured and kept alive was Superman, and then proceeded to inject him with liquid kryptonite, stripping him from his powers, but still keeping him alive as a big FU. This is almost worse than death, right? And then he had that green Superman symbol on his chest, and he now had he almost looked like a Green Lantern gone wrong, But it was that whole concept of, just that little thing right there. It's this is going to be worse than killing you, keeping you alive, powerless to watch all your loved ones die and the world you love be killed and tortured. I think that alone, tells you the tone of this entire movie. Just that little point in this movie kind of sets the tone for everything, because it just keeps ramping with things of that sort.
Exactly right. And that's a perfect way to put it. It really was such a good indicator of the overall tone of the entire movie from start to finish, that Darkseid just, would not just be able to defeat and capture Superman, but then inflict him with this punishment worse than death by infusing him with the liquid kryptonite, rendering him essentially powerless. And when we first see him after, once we get to that, 2 years down the road in that post-apocalyptic, world on Earth, when we first see him, he's literally wearing a hoodie.
Yeah,
he's just he's just this powerless dude with green eyes and green veins, and that classic Superman symbol just etched onto his chest with liquid kryptonite. And it really tells you right off the bat when he approaches Constantine and Etrigan, just how far things have fallen at that point.
For sure, yeah. And then, he approaches, like you said, when he approaches Constantine and Etrigan in the bar, he's with Raven, which was another big thing we didn't talk about last time. And obviously, this is all spoilers, so if you didn't know that before, we probably already spoiled some pretty good stuff for you. But towards the end of the movie, she became White Raven, which was crazy. I saw on the podcast that we posted on our channel, someone pointed it out. They tweeted to us. They tweeted to our Variant Twitter account saying, if she could, revive people, why didn't she do this earlier?
Right.
It's one of those things where it's it's comic books, man. There wouldn't be a story if you just do all these things. You kind of just have to go with it. There's no world where people could fly and have superpowers. So at least for me, and I know a lot of other people, who grew up with the DC Universe cartoons and stuff, Titans, we got to see White Raven in the Titans cartoon from, late 90s, early 2000s. So that's where my mind instantly went. I'm that is so awesome. Because even in the beginning of this movie, we see the Watchtower in space, which was very reminiscent of the Justice League Unlimited and Justice League Watchtower from, the DC animated universe. So there was a lot of little things like this that, as they're ending this continuity of movies, they're kind of throwing back to the things of old, where it's like, oh, remember the stuff that came before it, which I thought was really cool.
It was just so much stuff. They jam-packed so many things in there. Like you said, the White Raven, having her emerge, like in that moment where she's resurrecting Damian Wayne, and kind of just, it's an explosion of her power, and that, that energy field Raven comes out and lights up the screen, and Damian comes back to life, completely restored. And in that same time period, just staying with the resurrected, and the power is right after that is when Superman becomes possessed by Trigon.
Yeah.
And as soon as he does, Trigon literally just grabs hold of Constantine's neck, snaps his neck, and kills him. Dead.
Insane.
In like 2 seconds, it happens so fast. Constantine is now lying dead after having been the focus of the entire film. He's now lying dead on the ground. Right?
So good.
Only to then have Batman, who finally snaps out of it after he injures Damian.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another part of the film is his relationship with Damian and how that brought him back, and all of that. Hey, he saw himself and his son and the whole deal, which was another very cool aspect. But after he comes back, he goes to Cyborg, who, by the way, as we're talking about cramming all these things in, who is now infused into as part of the Source Wall, which is insane by itself. He goes up to Cyborg, who's part of the Source Wall, and is like, yeah, so where's Constantine? Because we really need him. And he's like, well, that's a problem. Because he's dead on the ground.
Yeah.
We now go to Constantine, who's with Zatanna, who explains to him what happens. And she tells him, like, what you got to do, basically. And it's in a crazy demonstration of Constantine's power and ability. He literally resurrects himself from the dead. Cool. And comes back to life. And Cyborg's like, how are you alive? And Batman's like, oh, hey, man. Welcome back.
And it's instances like that, which, what inspired one of our more recent episodes, How Powerful is John Constantine? Because this movie really, put, the spotlight on him and showed him. The crazy thing about Constantine is he's a real powerful sorcerer and mystic, but his real power comes from his intellect, where he's like a magnificent con man. So the mixture of the two enables him to like outwit people. So he may not, be a better sorcerer than like Dr. Fate or some of these other people, but with his his intellect combined and his wits and street smarts, he's able to trick these sorcerers and wizards and witches into these situations where he ends up beating them because of that. Not necessarily because he's more powerful in the mystic arts, but because he could, he's got those street smarts on top of that. He's like the best con man in the DC universe. So it's a really cool way, he's powerful, but not powerful in the sense where he has sheer more power than these characters. It's that mixed with his intellect, much like Batman, right? Like his real power is his brain and his money. So it's kind of like one of those things,
Yeah, and that's I think what makes him, it's the thing that makes him the most fun.
Yeah.
As a character, is that he's deceptive in that you don't expect much from him, and then it turns out he's like this insanely powerful sorcerer, but also like one of the smartest characters in the DC universe. It really makes him a fun character because he sneaks up on you.
For sure. And then speaking of, one of the things that got the internet, like I saw memes like literally the next day after this movie was released digitally, it was just like a 5-minute bit where Constantine meets the Suicide Squad, where Harley Quinn is like running this kind of underground like boxing ring or whatnot. But anyway, he points, being like, they used to date, and at first you think Harley Quinn and Constantine were dating.
He says, "Oh no, my ex."
My ex, right? So you're thinking Harley Quinn and Constantine, but in fact it was actually Constantine and King Shark, which got the whole like internet up in arms, or just talking, because we all know Constantine is bisexual, but we didn't know he was apparently into bestiality, I guess.
I that one really threw me for a loop. I even mentioned it to you. I was just like, did I hear that right? Like I wasn't missing something, right? Like It was so freaking weird. But also, the other thing too is that like what they did with King Shark just in general, where they turned him into like the Groot of the DC universe.
Right, yeah.
Where he just all he said was King Shark is a shark, like the whole time until the end, and then he speaks and Captain Boomerang's like, you got to be kidding.
I think I told you off camera that I loved / didn't like that. Like I thought it was really funny, but at the same time, I kind of like the more aggressive, like not so much just like a big stupid jock King Shark, you know, in that sense.
Yeah.
But it did play well in the movie and made for some pretty funny moments. I gotta say
it did. That was one of the few pieces of comic relief in the film to lighten it up a touch, which I think was obviously the point, that needed something to lighten it up a little bit.
But the funny thing is, it's like that dark humor though, because he's saying King Shark is a shark as he's literally biting off heads.
Yeah, that was kind of that was one of the elements that I said to you. It really kind of reminded me like they added a little bit of touch from the new vibe from the new Harley Quinn series.
Yeah, right.
You know, just that kind of there a little touch of that was in there. And that was a big part of it. So the King Shark is a shark in just his general Grootish behavior, and him having a fling with Constantine. Both of those things were just like the combo of those two things was just so weird.
One of the things I wanted to touch on, though, that you briefly mentioned earlier was the relationship with Damian and Batman. Because when Batman is possessed by Darkseid and, you know, on the Mobius share and stuff, he says some pretty horrible stuff to Damian, saying, you know, like, I never loved you, you're never my kid, Talia drugged me, I would have never done this on purpose. You know, basically just reaming his son apart, trying to make him feel like crap, right? But then at the end, once Damian is revived and Batman is no longer under Darkseid's influence, he does something the Batman like never does. In his Batman way, he tries to apologize, which I thought was really cool to see. He does, you know, mid trying to apologize in his Batman way, Damian interrupts him being like, look, Dad, you know, I know that wasn't you, basically, right? But it was just really cool to see that side of Batman, because we never really see that even in the comic books. You know, that's like a super rare thing for Batman to like admit that he was wrong or apologize on any level. So I really enjoyed that little bit. I just loved how that's the thing that made this movie so brilliant. Yes, like, you know, it was so shocking with all the violence and all that stuff, and you know, it was just good in general. But the theme in this movie with all the characters, I thought was so well done. And obviously, you know, arcs for any story is what's gonna make it good. And they just did such a good job with this. I can't say enough good things about this movie.
Yeah, it was very well done, and it was one of the most jam-packed you know, animated films I've ever seen in terms of the amount of things that took place in this relatively short film. It's not that long. Sure. But yeah, it was really good. And the Bruce Wayne's relationship with Damian and them hinting at Damian being the only one, you know, early on in the film that would possibly be able to, you know, get to Bruce. Yeah. And then that playing out in the end. Another part of that was very cool was actually when they came face to face, and how Bruce, who was still under, you know, the impression of Darkseid, how he says to Damian, like, I let you win before, the times before where you even had a shot. I let you win. I'm not holding back this time.
Right, yeah.
Like that, I thought that was really cool too. Even though, I mean, he's fighting his son, so it's like, yeah, you know, you're fighting your son. So it's like, but it's still, it was so Batman was just like, yeah, you're about to get hurt. And he does. He takes him out quickly.
For sure. I think this movie, you know, like you were saying, it was so jam-packed. I think, you know, a lot of people say, oh, this movie or this show wasn't good because they just put too much in it. I don't think that's the case. I think movies like this, obviously Infinity War, Endgame, stuff of that nature, prove that you could put a crap ton in a movie. Yes. It just has to be done right. You know, that's exactly the whole thing. Right. I'm a big believer that you could make anything work. I mean, the MCU made a talking tree that only says 3 words in a particular order work. If you could make that work, you could make anything work as long as you pick the right tone and feel for it, you know? So I kind of like, I hate when people say that, like, they put too much stuff in it. I'm like, yeah, that just means they didn't do a good job. Doesn't mean you can't make it work. You know what I mean?
It's all about the skill of the storyteller. Right. That's really what it always boils down to. If the writer, the directors, the editors, if they understand the story they're trying to tell and they see the roadmap, that's why, you know, knowing your ending is so incredibly important.
For sure. And not pull a Lost.
Exactly. Yes. Oh my, don't bring that up. You're killing me. But yeah, it's so incredibly important. And as long as the storytellers know where they're going, all the pieces are going to be there with intention.
For sure.
You know what I mean? Everything will be purposeful. So none of it is going to seem overwhelming. It's when you feel like you was overwhelming, it's because the storytellers really didn't have a really fluid or something went wrong in the storytelling process.
100%. Well, with that said, are we missing anything before we move on? I don't know. We might be, but
the one thing I do want to mention,
Okay.
Going back to Superman,
Okay.
is we also got to see a powerless Superman before he snapped himself and broke himself free from Darkseid's, kind of the liquid kryptonite, what Darkseid did to him.
Right.
We get to see Clark Kent in Lex Luthor's mech suit.
Right. Very cool.
And
That's right.
that was another one of the coolest parts of the movie for me that we didn't mention in the spoiler review because I forgot. But I absolutely love that. I thought that was such a cool ad.
Well, it was like the irony of it all, right? Where
Yes, exactly. Like full circle.
Exactly. He's wearing
Especially because Lex Luthor is the one who puts him in it.
Yeah, 100%. He's having to choose the weapons, and he's like, it's laced in kryptonite and all this stuff, which is, again, it's just the irony of it all that he's wearing.
And I think even Lois Lane even says to him, like, you built all this to kill my husband. He's like, what can I say? I had problems.
And then Superman is forced to get in his number one enemy's, back or mech suit, and then use the weapons again that were built to kill him. I just thought,
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. That was very, very cool. This movie did so many little things like that that worked so well, and then with it all combined, it just made for like I don't want to say it too early because it's only been about 2 weeks since I watched it, but one of my favorite movies. That once one of my favorite DC animated movies that went straight to home video was Under the Red Hood, and I feel like I don't want to say that I like this more just yet, but I feel like if anyone's gonna rival it, this one probably is. You know what I mean? So I have to sit on it a little longer. I still want to watch. I still haven't watched it a second time, but after a few more viewings, it very well could. It could, at least for me.
I can understand that. I mean, it's certainly it has all the qualities. Like I'd said it, in the spoiler review too. I think this is one of DC's DC animated films. I think this is the best one of the best ones they've ever made. And again, we have to mention too, and this is the last thing I'll say is going back to Superman, is that what made him break free, what caused him to break free of what Darkseid did to him with the liquid kryptonite and return to his normal state, is he actually had to watch Lois Lane die. She's somewhere else, trying to enact another part of their plan to take down these Reapers that are destroying the Earth's core. And, she says goodbye to him and she dies right in front of him on screen. And, the screen, flashes out and that breaks him free. So just all these little things that happened throughout the story. It was just so well done. And it was they weaved it into the story in just a way that, again, you never felt overwhelmed by the amount of things that were happening outside of just like shock, a good shock.
Yeah.
So it's just really well done. And again, just one of the best DC animated films I think ever made.
What I thought was really cool about that scene too, it was kind of reminiscent of Christopher Reeve's Superman, right? When Lois dies in the and then he flies around the Earth to turn back time. But just the whole concept of like Lois is the thing that'll make Superman snap. You know what I mean? It's like you don't mess with a dude's like wife or kids. Those are the two things you don't mess with: a guy's wife or kids. That'll make you snap.
And that didn't come out of nowhere either. They set that up the entire film.
Right. 100%.
They were showing throughout. They were showing his greatest concern was Lois and how protective he was being about her and everything she did. And even her involvement in the plan because he didn't want her to get hurt and the whole thing. So they set that up throughout the film, just the same way they set up the conclusion between Damian and Bruce all throughout the film. So there's just a lot of little things like that. Just really well done.
I think what we're saying is, if you haven't watched this film, one, what the heck are you doing listening to us spoil the crap out of it right now? And two, go watch it because it is really, really good. But our next topic up for the day is back to DC. Like we said at the very beginning of this podcast, it's a very DC-centric episode, but that's because they're the only ones really putting out new content, it seems, as of lately. If you haven't seen, DC Comics is introducing yet another Lantern Corps. A few years back, Scott Snyder, within his Justice League title, introduced the Violent Lantern Corps on top of all the other colors: red, blue, violet, white, black, green, so on and so forth. But fear not, guys. If you thought they were out of colors, they are not out of colors. Because Brian,
it's a never-ending source. They've got an entire spectrum.
Brian Michael Bendis is giving us a Gold Lantern Corps.
That's
So,
right.
you know, I mean, I guess the next one up after this is you're going to have silver, right?
It only makes sense. Then platinum.
Platinum, bronze.
We'll hit all the precious metals.
It's almost like a joke now where kind of like going to like Dragon Ball Z, everyone's like, what color are you going to change Goku's hair now? You know what I mean? Like black, gold, pink, blue. So now we're doing the same thing with the Lantern Corps. So it does seem like, you know, I'm a bit, when this was first introduced way back when, and I believe the Sinestro Corps Wars, all the different lantern colors, it was dope. It's amazing.
Right.
You know, the rage and just, you know, all the emotional spectrum and, you know, all their different oaths. Very, very cool. I will say, though, that, you know, I even like the Violet Lantern Corps, the most recent one before this gold one by Scott Snyder. But it does seem a little repetitive and kind of just like, you know, something they have in the arsenal where they're like, we know what they like. Lantern Corps. Let's give them another color. You know what I mean? Where I would kind of like it spaced out a little more, especially since like a year and a half, 2 years ago, we did just get the Violet Lantern Corps, or the Ultra. Sorry, I think the Ultra Violet Lantern Corps. There's so many colors.
It's Ultraviolet, yeah.
Ultraviolet Lantern Corps. So, you know, we don't know much about this yet or what the power set is going to be for the Gold Lantern. But, you know, I will say, although I'm intrigued, I'm kind of like, okay, let's go a little longer without introducing a new core. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's, again, like you said, you already said it, but the lanterns are cool. In fact, we did an episode years ago that explains all of the different lanterns, the different cores and their power sets and so forth. It's actually one of our highest viewed episodes that we've ever made. So these different, all the different lantern cores are wildly popular. Right. And it's always interesting to see them introduce a new one. But yes, I agree. At some point, it does start to get redundant, might be too strong of a word, but it starts to feel maybe excessive.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. But having said that, I mean, how else are you going to breathe life into, you know, the Lantern Corps concept other than to introduce some new some new addition to the spectrum? So it does make sense.
I just think the spacing out, because again, I feel like a year, 2 years, again, I keep saying it, but like when Snyder introduced the Ultraviolet Lantern Corps, you know, I feel like that just kind of happened, you know what I mean? So it's like,
right.
Okay. Because I think it needs to be one of those things like, I feel the same way with the Joker. I love the Joker. He is my favorite villain, but I do think DC has been using him a little too much over the last several years. And I feel something like the Joker or a new Lantern Corps needs to be like a trump card, right? Where you've gone a long time without it. So when the next time they do introduce a new one, you're like, oh man. Where, you know, since we keep getting them so frequently, it's not as exciting. You know what I mean? Because remember when we got all the new ones, like the red and blue, and then when we even got like white and black, we're like, wow.
Right.
But now we're kind of losing that wow factor now because we're like, oh, another core. You know what I mean? So I don't know if there's another twist to it. Again, we don't know much, so I feel like it is a little unfair to judge it right now. At the same time, maybe there is a cool spin Bendis is putting on it that links it back to something that makes it really cool. But just at face value, I'm like, okay, maybe wait a little longer. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it comes down to, you know, as different writers, different creators get their hands on these different characters and their worlds, you know, they all, you know, many of them, you'll hear them say something to the effect of, you know, I've always had this idea for this character and I've always wanted to tell this story or this version of this character. And so, you know, when they get their hands on it, they're switching creators. I mean, they just want to put their fingerprint on it. So it makes a lot of sense from that vantage point.
100%.
And, you know, I will say, you know, Brian Michael Bendis, you know, he's been doing Superman. Now he's doing, you know, he's working with the Lanterns. And he's looking to do some crazy stuff with the Lanterns. It sounds like we don't know much about it, but one of the interesting things about this Gold Lantern, that again, we don't know anything about it yet, but it's that he has 2 rings. He has a ring on each hand. Done. Yes. So he's got the kind of like typical, you know, lantern flight ring. And then he's got a second ring, a gold ring. And it's kind of like this mystery ring. We don't know what it is or what it's going to do, but obviously that's going to be a major part of the character.
Are we sure it's not his superhero Legion's ring? Again, I don't know, because this is taking place, we should have mentioned that earlier, this is taking place in the Legion of Superheroes, and we all know the Legion of Superheroes do have their own gold ring, so it could be that, maybe? I don't know.
It could be, but it looks like a lantern ring.
Okay, all right. I guess we'll have to find out.
So again, who knows? We don't know anything about it, but he's the only lantern that you see wearing two rings like that are both of them look like lantern rings, one on each hand. So it's interesting. So who knows? He might have like a super cool idea, and it might be a really interesting addition to the Lantern Corps world. And mythology. But the one thing I will say about all the different corps is when they introduced the White Lantern Corps, that was when I was just like, this should probably be the last one.
Well, it's literally
it encompasses all of them.
Yeah, it's all of them. Yeah. What's funny though is it encompasses all of them, right? So does that mean it also encompasses the ones that came after it that weren't in there at that time? Right? Like, is the ultraviolet core part of that? Is this gold core part of that now? Because those came after the fact. But it does have to, right? Because literally white is everything, right?
Everything.
And where black is the absence of color. So I'm very, very curious.
There's a lot of things they can do with it. And honestly, as they add these different cores, it also opens up different story opportunities for the cores that came before it. You know what I mean? Because it expands the mythos and it provides other story opportunities.
You know what? That would be interesting to me if they did something like that where, like, they tie it back to like the White Lantern Corps or something of that sort, where it's like, look, we know white encompasses everything, but not this one because X, Y, and Z. And then they put in the mythos why it doesn't. See, something like that, where it's now conflicting with the mythos and universe, I think that would make it more appealing to me. Again, it's not fair to judge this stuff face value, so we do have to read first to see what he's doing with it, because we don't know where the heck it's going. But
exactly.
I am very curious. I'm definitely gonna bite and see what it's about.
You always want to give it a shot, and it's Brian Michael Bendis. He has quite a track record as far as in the industry as a writer. Some people love what he does. Some people have had problems with some of his more recent work, but I mean, there's no denying like the impression that he's had on comics. So you're definitely going to give it a shot.
But just like that, friends, I think we're out of topics for today's podcast.
Yeah, I think we gave a fair share. So I think
we did.
We gave everybody their money's worth today.
But on that note, we'll see you guys next time when we talk about all things comics.